Hello again, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this Friday's edition of Alaska Weather. I'm Dave Percy, a meteorologist with the National Weather Service, and I'll be hosting today's show. Up first, we've got a breakup map. All the rivers south of the Brooks Range are broken up and running freely, mostly open now along the Noatak River. Now, on the Colville River, quite an area of unknown river status there, with some open right around, I think that's Umiat there, and then mostly ice on out to the Arctic coast. Kaparik River, mostly ice, and then on the Sagwan River, there are some areas of mostly and some open zones there, and then ice on out toward the coastline. Fire danger chart. Extreme fire danger today over the Yukon Flats, and quite an area of high fire danger extending westward from there in toward the far eastern Kobuk Valley area there across the Koyukuk, and also in the Fairbanks area we've got some extreme fire danger, and to the east toward Delta Junction with the breezy conditions there. Also very high to extreme fire danger into the Copper River Basin. And south of the Alaska Range, though, pretty low, actually across all southern and western Alaska, as well as the Panhandle. And from there, taking a look at the graphic, the red area there, that's a high fire danger warning, known as a red flag warning for the Yukon Flats and upland areas there. And that's out until 10 p.m. this evening for extreme fire danger with temperatures in the mid to upper 70s. Humidity's 15%, and breezy conditions make for extreme fire danger again until about 10 p.m. tonight, when then the humidity should go up and winds diminish a little bit. But don't look for any rain there over the next couple of days. On the satellite, you can see a front kind of stretched out and drifting northward from Prince William Sound, with the higher clouds spilling into the Tanana Valley, and then a lot of cloudiness over the western interior with areas of light rain and showers extending from the northwest coast right on down to Bristol Bay, and then another developing trough or weak front there for the Alaska Peninsula, the main low center back towards Nikolsky, west of Nikolsky, well south of the Pribilofs. And the front hanging up along the southeast coast there, a chance of rain along the north coast during the afternoon, really nothing much showing up. Now extending back along the North Gulf Coast into Kodiak. Most of the heaviest rainfall occurred around Prince William Sound, Kenai Peninsula, with Seward picking up a third of an inch of rain, while Cordova had about a half an inch. These are 12-hour amounts ending during the afternoon today. And Cordova had about half an inch, and then Whittier right around an inch, and Portage Glacier an inch and a half. So that's where the heaviest precipitation was. Out to the west, 0.15 of an inch fell at around the Sandpoint Cold Bay area, and Kodiak had under a tenth of an inch with some lingering light rain there, with unsettled conditions back across the Aleutians. And rolling this through again, you could see the clearing that took place, allowed temperatures into the mid-70s, lower to mid-70s from Eagle up to Beaver and Fort Yukon, and the Arctic coast, sunshine, even out to the coastline at Kaktovik and Barter Island. On the chart today, you can see the clearing from the eastern Beaufort Sea coast down to about that trough axis, and you start picking up the clouds around the White Mountains, and then the higher clouds thicken as you get down toward the Alaska Range, with cloudy skies across Copper River Basin, keeping it cooler there, with the rainfall along the North Gulf Coast to about Yakutat, trying to push into the north coast of the Panhandle, extending back toward Kodiak Island. Widespread areas of light rain and showers over much of western interior into the Kuskokwim Valley, but amounts generally less than a tenth of an inch over the last 12 hours. Same thing over the Alaska Peninsula and for the Aleutians. Looking at tonight's forecast, it stays wet along the North Gulf Coast and Prince William Sound, eastward to possibly Girdwood, but not expecting much down western Turnagain Arm or into Cook Inlet from about Anchor Point northward to Palmer. Should be dry over the Susitna Valley, but cloudy, and it'll be partly to mostly clear from the Tanana Valley northward to the Arctic coast. Lingering showers back to the west there along the Brooks Range into the Kobuk Valley, And along the northwest coast, kind of damp with fog continuing. They're down to a quarter-mile visibility at Cape Lisburne earlier today, and that could drop that low again this evening. Low pressure eastern Aleutians, or just north of Unalaska Island, keeps a lot of low clouds, fog, and drizzle. A little breezy out over the western Aleutians, but winds aren't much of a factor for the Alaska Peninsula eastward to Kodiak, with areas of light rain along that weak front. And for tomorrow, rain finally pushes across most of the southeast coast with increasing winds, definitely along especially the south coast. Could see possible gales in a narrow band ahead of that front, with much lighter winds but still wet and cloudy, damp and cloudy, Prince William Sound and the North Gulf Coast. Another sunny day over the eastern interior, the Copper River Basin, are mostly sunny with temperatures back into the lower to mid-70s. And that could extend into the Kuskokwim Valley. Could see 60s there, but a few more clouds. Outlook for Sunday. Low pressure continues now over the eastern Bering Sea, and several troughs bring enhanced areas of light rain, fog, and drizzle the Alaska Peninsula, eastern Aleutians, all the way back to about Kiska Island. And a pretty good chance of widespread shower activity with cloudy skies over Cook Inlet, all of southern Alaska, especially the Copper River Basin. Now that's spilling into the eastern upper Tanana Valley, 40-mile country, and stays damp over the Panhandle. Lows for tonight, 20s on the Arctic coast, 40s over the interior, and upper 40s for the Panhandle. Highs tomorrow, mid-70s. Again, eastern interior to low 70s over the central interior, north of the Alaska Range, south of the mountains chillier. And Sunday morning to Sunday afternoon, back into the 70s over the eastern interior.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
First line weather graphic, Saturday morning, IFR, North Slope, Arctic coast. Southward through the Bering Strait, and most of the Bering Sea and Aleutians will be IFR, as well as Kodiak Island, North Gulf Coast, Gulf of Alaska, Panhandle VFR, Northern Cook Inlet, Madawaska-Susitna Valley VFR, Interior VFR. And for the afternoon, interior, more widespread VFR, including Norton Sound up to Kotzebue, and the Seward Peninsula. IFR, though, holding out over the Bering Sea, North Slope Arctic coast, marginal VFR to the Berks Range, north side, and IFR, Prince William Sound, east side of the Kenai Peninsula, North Gulf Coast. Most of the Panhandle IFR now, with marginal VFR, northern Lynn Canal to Skagway, White Pass area in Chilkoot. Sunday morning, not much change. Lots of VFR, mostly out over the Bering Sea and the Aleutians, as well as the Alaska Peninsula. Bristol Bay looks pretty marginal. A band of IFR cutting across southern Kuskokwim Valley to the western Alaska Range and across southern Cook Inlet, Kamishak Bay, Seldovia, Port Muller, Homer. Looking IFR to start Sunday morning. Out as otherwise northern Cook Inlet, Anchor Point on up to Palmer, and Susitna Valley, VFR. IFR showing up along and north of the Alaska Range here in the central Tanana Valley, with VFR from the Yukon Delta up along the river to Eagle, and marginal VFR for the southeast coast. Afternoon, no change from the North Slope and Arctic coast. IFR up there for through Sunday. And looks like also through the Bering Strait, St. Lawrence Island, Bering Sea, a couple of IFR days coming up as for the Aleutians as well, and some VFR now for the Alaska or for the Bristol Bay and the southwest interior. Some leftover marginal VFR South Central Alaska, IFR Prince William Sound, North Gulf Coast to Yakutat, and looks like VFR in the afternoon all of the southeast coast with some marginal VFR clinging to the outer coastline. Passes, Anativik and Adigan, both marginal VFR tomorrow. And Lake Clark and Merrill, occasionally marginal. Same forecast for Rainy, occasional marginal VFR. Windy, VFR. Tanita, VFR. As well as, let me back up, Isabel, VFR. Ventasta, VFR, but southern entrance possibly becoming marginal in the afternoon. And for Tanita, VFR with marginal VFR possible on the eastern entrance, and Portage, IFR possible on the eastern entrance, otherwise marginal. And for Chilkoot and White, VFR becoming marginal latter part of the afternoon. Freezing levels, 8,000 feet, so you that upper level ridging there over the eastern interior areas, upper Tanana Valley to about Eagle, and then 6,000 feet right up along and off the Arctic coast and North Slope, 8,000 feet southern southeast coast, 2,000 feet out over the Bering Sea, southeast Bering, eastern Aleutians. And for icing, look for considerable moderate rime icing with that frontal boundary and all the moisture pushing onto the southeast coast as well as approaching Yakutat, and in the upslope areas are kind of terrain enhanced there for the Prince William Sound area, Kenai Peninsula, and a weak band of icing potential of the light variety, Kodiak Island across Bristol Bay to Nunivak Island, and scattered threats for the eastern Aleutians, Alaska Peninsula. Jet stream showing upper level ridging, mostly affecting the eastern interior areas, and a split in the jet there for that low just north of the eastern Aleutians, 50 knots wrapping up across Bristol Bay and then taking off to the northwest across the northern Bering Sea. Other branch almost making the southern panhandle, then diving southeastward. And for 9,000 feet, we've got southeast winds at about 40 knots along and off the southeast coast of the North Gulf Coast, eastward to about 35 knots along the southwest coast, north-northwest, 10 to 20 there for the Aleutians. Same pattern at 3,000 feet. 40-knot winds, though. Nunivak Island, call it 30 knots across Bristol Bay, but 40 knotters there and over the southwest interior. 45 knots along the panhandle to possibly 50 knots on the south coast, translate to moderate chop. In that area, especially along the coast tomorrow, possible moderate chop for the far eastern Arctic coast, and around Atka Island, probably could see some moderate chop as well, below 5,000 feet. Otherwise, look for light to isolated moderate chop for small aircraft, Prince William Sound into Turnagain Arm.
You guys got everything tied down back there? Yeah. Yep. We're going through the lee of St. Elias, so there might be some turbulence.
Fasten seatbelt sign on.
Well, who am I to tell you what to do?
There are tens of thousands of glaciers in Alaska. Some stunning cliffhangers, others wide glaciers that come down to meet the ocean tides. Some, like this one we flew over in August, are easily visible from low Earth orbit and are mesmerizing from 1,000 feet above, and have trees growing on top of their soil-laden boundaries. Those glaciers, although they represent only a fraction of the world's ice, are contributing much more than their share to sea level rise. Chris Larson and his colleagues have repeatedly measured 220 of them in a small single-engine otter, measuring their height with lasers and their depth with radar, and watching them change from season to season and year to year. But Alaskan glaciers are also different. We're only just figuring out how they all behave. Data from flights like these, part of NASA's Operation Icebridge, can help fill the gaps. Chris and radar specialist Martine Trufer are both from the University of Alaska Fairbanks and both seasoned Alaskan pilots. But they rely on their good friend and legendary bush pilot Paul Kloss and his 35,000 hours in the cockpit to fly the incredibly demanding flight lines the mission requires.
And does it help you guys being pilots too?
I would like to think so, but watching Paul fly and seeing what he does, it's kind of like trying to learn quantum mechanics in kindergarten.
You know, I can fly my airplane around, but just seeing what Paul does in this extremely challenging environment in the mountains while trying to follow a specific flight line at a specific altitude above ground, negotiating winds, topography, maybe occasional low-level clouds that you have to get around, and just managing all that is just several levels above what I could do as a pilot.
Well, I think the first time I came here to this park, I was probably 4 years old with my father. I've been blessed to be able to fly in lots of places in the world, all over the place actually, almost every continent. I guess I'm always looking for some place that might be better than this, but I haven't found it.
Paul's plane is about 60 years old and is the first single-engine Otter ever retrofitted with a 1,000 horsepower engine, which makes takeoffs feel effortless and gives Paul the ability to negotiate wild terrain, which he certainly did during the first 2 incredible science flights of this campaign. And with sunny skies and relatively calm air, we covered 3 vastly different pieces of ice. While Paul fueled up the plane, Chris gave us a preview of the day's science and scenery.
So it has one of the greatest coastal reliefs anywhere in the world. So it's between the ocean and the summit of Mount St. Elias, which is 18,008 feet high. It's less than 10 miles. There's a stupendous amount of mountain right off the ocean. It's hard to beat it anywhere in the world. It might be the prettiest for me. It's absolutely stunning. From here in McCarthy, we'll cross one of the bigger precipitation gradients in Alaska too. Here it's about 10 inches of precipitation a year, and we'll go over to an area where it's on the order of 200 inches per year. So it's from one of the driest parts of Alaska to one of the wettest parts of Alaska in about 45 minutes flight time.
Whoa, that's pretty good.
That's awesome. You want to do Tyndall next?
Sure, where you want.
If the winds are calm now, might as well grab it.
First, we came to the rugged landscape of Icy Bay, which not that long ago wasn't a bay at all. It was filled with ice. Tidewater glaciers in this region can make dramatic advances and retreats as they feed on high rates of snowfall and then retreat as they're melted by warm ocean waters. Like the Tyndall Glacier seen here, most of these glaciers have retreated dramatically over the last 100 years. But nearby Yahtzee Glacier, after years of retreat, is currently the most rapidly advancing glacier in Alaska. Overall, though, the Icebridge Alaska surveys, from the Denali region in the north to the Juneau ice field in the southeast, have documented pretty substantial thinning of glacial ice. Areas seen here in orange and red show between about 10 and 15 feet of thinning per year.
There's a nice waterfall up there from the hanging ice.
When we very first started profiling this, Paul, this gravel fan and the one in the valley next to it didn't exist.
Yeah, I was gonna say,
this was
look at all the good landing spots here.
Yeah,
There's no place to land here before.
no, it was deep water.
After covering several of Icy Bay's glaciers, given that it was time for lunch, just like that, we landed in this unforgettable spot. Flying eastward, leaving Icy Bay behind, we came to the mighty Malaspina, one of the Earth's great examples of a Piedmont glacier that spills out like pancake batter onto a broad plain as it approaches the sea. It surges at uneven intervals, creating dramatic patterns on its surface as it distorts the moraines of rock and soil borne along by the glacier. The Malaspina is less dynamic than the Yahtzee and is only melting at about the average rate for Alaska, but that could change quickly.
It has the potential for being one of the bigger geographic evolutions in Alaska. Certainly my son will be able to witness some big geography changes there. There's potential for it being connected with the ocean through some narrow lagoons, estuaries, which would take a little bit of coastal erosion, but it's not too hard to imagine that where the Malaspina Glacier is now could become a large bay.
The data that Martine's radar provides could reveal how vulnerable the Malaspina is to melting by the nearby ocean. Here we see the radar returns from the surface of the glacier, and here is something that Chris's lasers can't see, the rocky bed of the glacier, giving us both clues as to what's happening under the ice, as well as a measurement of its thickness. Finally, we came to the Yakutat ice field, 300 square miles of absolutely doomed ice perched high in the mountains. Researchers even debate how this ice field came to be at all, since in its current configuration, it's hard to imagine how it could capture enough snow to form glacial ice. And so, even if the Arctic weren't warming faster than the rest of the planet, this area would be likely to melt within a century or two. But with many other glaciers, it's easier to see the connection between a warming planet and ice loss. Thanks to data from IceBridge and other surveys, we now have a good estimate of the current rate of loss from Alaskan glaciers, 75 gigatons a year. While airborne observations over Alaskan glaciers have provided a rich record of change in the area, those efforts are now augmented by NASA's newest ice measuring tool, ICESat-2. With 6 laser beams of its own, and orbiting the Earth every 90 minutes, the satellite will carry on the record of Alaskan change. For their part, Chris and his team will continue to do their surveys for at least the next 2 years, helping to validate the ICESat-2 data and make further detailed observations over the stunning glaciers of Alaska.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome back. Sea ice analysis for today, showing a little bit of ice there in the northeast corner of Nunivak Island and a little bit along the Yukon Delta coast. St. Lawrence Island, heavier ice on the north shore there. And that area over western Norton Sound, holding fast but beginning to show some breaks there in the southern quadrant down toward the coastline. Moving on to coastal water forecasts. For Saturday, gale warnings all along the Panhandle coastline tomorrow. Southeast 35 knots on the south coast and east 35 for the north coast. Seas running 13 to 14 feet. Gale force northerly gusts in store for Stevens Passage with sustained winds at 20 knots from the north. Southeast 30 Clarence Strait, 7-foot seas, and southeast 15 for Lynn Canal. Those will turn south at 15 on Sunday with central and southern inside waters looking at southerly winds 10 to 15 knots, 2 to 3 foot seas. Much lighter winds now in the forecast for the Panhandle coastline, southwest 15 knots with 9-foot seas. Prince William Sound, as well as Cook Inlet, northeast winds 20 knots, seas in the inlet 4 to 5 feet, and in the Sound 3 feet. East 30 knots for the eastern North Gulf Coast with 11-foot seas, but just north at 15 on the west side there with 8-foot seas, even lighter winds for the Barren Islands, east at 10. Kamishak Bay, east winds at 15 knots with 4-foot seas. For Sunday, Kamishak Bay and Cook Inlet all southerly at 10 knots with 3-foot seas. Prince William Sound south also, seas 2 feet. And the North Gulf Coast, looking at southwest winds 15 to 20 knots, strongest toward Middleton Island, seas running 8 feet, and 8-foot seas with 15 knot southerly winds also out for the Barren Islands. Shelikof Strait, east 20 knots tomorrow, east side of Kodiak Island, southeast 20, and Sitkinak to Castle Cape, southeast winds 20 knots, 9-foot seas. Light northerlies for the Bering Sea side of the Alaska Peninsula, south side, 15 out of the south, and small craft advisories for Bristol Bay. That's where the strongest winds will be found. 25 knots with 5-foot seas. Those will fall back to 15 knots on Sunday, and the Alaska Peninsula south to southeast 15 to 20 knots, and then for Kodiak Island, including Shelikof Strait, southerlies at 15, 3 to 7-foot seas. Kiska to Shimia tomorrow, northwest at 20, but small craft advisories from Amchitka Island eastward to Atka. Northwest 25 knots, 7 to 8-foot seas, and northwest 20 knots for Unmak Island, and west on average 10 to 15 knots for Unalaska Island. And then for Sunday, on Alaska Island, southwest 25, west 25, Unmak Island, Adak and Atka, west at 25. and then 20-knot winds from Amchitka to Shemya. For Norton Sound, east 15, turn northeast 15, cross St. Lawrence Island, Yukon Delta Coast, east winds 20 knots, Kuskokwim Delta Coast, east 15, northwest at 20 for both the Pribilofs and St. Matthew Island with 5 to 6 foot seas. For Sunday, Norton Sound, northeast at 10 with 2 foot seas, St. Lawrence Island northerlies at 20, 4 foot seas, Yukon Delta Coast east at 15, southeast 15 for the Kuskokwim Delta coastline, Pribilofs east at 20, 5 foot seas, northeast 25 for small craft advisories for St. Matthew Island and seas at about 6 feet. Pretty brisk winds on the eastern Beaufort Sea coast tomorrow, and there is a brisk wind advisory out for both that area and the Central Coast. Central Coast looking at sustained winds out of the east at 25 knots, 30 knots for the east side, 20 knots on the western coast, and then diminishing to 15 out of the north. East become even lighter there for the Chukchi Sea. Wales to Cape Thompson for Sunday, north at 20, northeast 15 for the western Arctic coast, Central Coast kick it up to 20 knots out of the east, and then brisk wind advisories continue for the entire stretch of the eastern Beaufort Sea coast, east winds 25 to 30 knots. For tonight, possible fog, especially central and west side of the Arctic coast with light rain, fog, or drizzle from possibly Point Ley, more than likely Cape Lisburne, on down to the Bering Strait. Scattered showers along the western Brooks Range, mostly dry, staying dry. It will be dry with mostly clear skies over the eastern interior, with clouds in the Tanana Valley, Copper River Basin, chance of rain in the North Gulf Coast, and light rain for the Alaska Peninsula, Bristol Bay, all of the Aleutians, and southern Bering Sea. That continues through Saturday as well. Temperatures back into lower to mid-70s north of the White Mountains. And for Sunday, wet in the south, fair in the north.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.